Hi again. The other 10-minute session that Matt wanted me to look at was some of the ups and downs, the good, the bad and the ugly of church life. Because in churches like ours, there's great things happening and there's heartaches happening. One of my favourite authors is Eugene Peterson. And maybe you've read The Message, and he's most famous for translating the Bible into what we call the Message. But he has written some brilliant books on many subjects and worth getting hold of, worth reading. But one thing that he says as he writes to pastors is you have to learn to live with the mystery and the mess. And to me that sums up a bit of what the life of the church is about. There's great mystery and there's mess. I look back over many, many years of church involvement, of church leadership, and there have been things that have been so exciting, so wonderful, and there have been major heartaches. You can't have the one without the other. And it would be nice to be in a church where it was all mystery and all wonderful. But because church is people, we interact with the dynamics that shape human life. Now, my basic premise for church, personally, is a church is based on relationship. Based on relationship with God, the Father, Son and Spirit. It's based on our relationships together, and the New Testament gives many pictures, especially in Ephesians, of the church being built together as a bride, as an army, as a building, as a family. The church is relational, but out of that relational aspect, there's a love for God's world, where we try to build relationship with those who do not know him and need to know him. And that sounds good and it's great, but you know as well as I do, you are often most hurt by people who are closest to you. And I know there'll be some of you, as has been our experience, where you've been hurt in relationship. I am saddened to see the number of cases of complaints, allegations about Christian leaders and well-known Christian leaders. And I know with each one, whether the complaint is justified or not, there's a trail of people who've been hurt by it. And we have to learn to live with that mystery and mess. And we have to choose to live with that mystery and mess, not give up because it gets difficult. Sometimes I'm asked what are the most difficult things I've had to contend with in church life. One of them has been, I have been involved for various reasons, I'm not sure why, in being drawn into situations where leaders, some nationally, internationally well-known leaders, have fallen morally, or they've abused the power they've got. And what I've seen is that the devastation has been great. What I've seen is that some, sadly, have only repented or apparently repented because they've been found out. And it's a bit like David when he fell with Bathsheba, and Nathan comes up to him and said, David, what you've done has brought discredit to God in the nations of the world. And the heartache is, because the church is made up of ordinary people, fallible people, people who are a mixture between wanting to serve God and yet there's the whole selfish element. Because the church is made up of that, sometimes we cause chaos. And to me it's been so painful at times having to sit down with those who I've walked with, worked with, and had to say, you need to stand down. You need to put this right in your life. Picking up the pieces of people who've been hurt. Maybe they felt spiritually abused or abused in other ways. And that's hard. And as well, probably the other hardest thing we've had to deal with is when you deal with people in relationships, at some stage bereavement comes in. We had a tragic situation some years ago. We had a gap year team, and one of the team sadly drowned in South Africa. And Ree, my wife and I, we had to go with a good friend of ours to tell the parents. the British Embassy wanted me to fly out to identify the body and look after things at that end. And it's not easy. Church is painful. If you get alongside people, which church is about, there will be some pain. But what I do know is that the riches of relationships has stood longer and firmer than the pain of relationships. We have been, like most people, I'm not saying life's been any more difficult, but we've had to process some heartaches as a family. My daughter was diagnosed with cancer when she was a fair bit younger, a long course of chemotherapy, and then she was re-diagnosed. And we were told, the doctors said to us and her, we might not be able to bring you through this. So we had to wrestle with that. But one thing that stands out over that period is every night before she had chemo, and she had chemo for months, a group of friends would come round and we'd just pray and worship together. Andrew and Ruth were part of that. And that sustained us. And what I've seen so often in the life of the church is its relationships God has used to sustain us. And the question I ask myself often, we say the prayer, Lord, give us this day our daily bread. Often I will pray, Lord, can I be the answer to someone's prayer today? Is the thing, the stuff that somebody needs, is someone to go and stand alongside them? And as we've processed a lot of heartache in lots of different ways, we've had people who've stood with us. They haven't had the answers, because sometimes, and we're still searching for some answers in some of the situations, but they've said, we will stand with you. And that is the joy of church. That's the mystery. Yes, there's a mess, but there is a mystery. Sometimes it's the sadness of people who once walked with you, and for whatever reason are no longer walking with God, or apparently not walking with God. Or some people who I think are probably walking with God, but have found they can't connect with church. And so they're almost on a solo journey, which I don't think is God's best. However you define church, it's not a journey that we're meant to walk on our own. And it's the sadness of fallen friends. It's the heartache of family issues. Sometimes it's just for those who are getting older, coming to terms with the limitations and the lack of capacity and the lack of dreams. And I know several older people, and their heart cry is, have I got any use? Can I be useful? And the problem is that if you've got a relationally based church, we have to face these issues. We can't ignore them. One of the challenges that I've had to examine my heart on is when I see others blessed, whether it be churches or individuals, in ways that I would like to be blessed. Whether it be someone's family, whether it be adding great increase to the church. And several years ago, as I was praying for different churches in Bristol, I felt God say to me, would I be prepared to pray that he will bless them even more than he's blessing us? And I tried to do a deal with God. I said, I will do as long as you ask them to do the same thing. But sometimes we have to wrestle with, we are going through one journey and someone else seems to be on an easier route. And what I've come to see is that there are times when God lifts us out of the miry clay. And there are times when God says, when you go through the waters, I will walk with you. And I've seen that in healing. I'm sure many here could give testimony of your own story or stories you've seen of people who have been healed by the power of God, and that's wonderful. And yet sometimes there's the dynamic of what happens when you don't see healing. And it's not a lack of faith, it's not that you had more faith for someone than someone else. It seems that they're been taken on a different journey. Some years ago, I visited a church in the States that I've been working with for some time, and they'd lost two key people. One was very sudden, and the other was a bit drawn out. And the church was in great faith that they'd be raised from the dead. In fact, with one of them, they took clothes and they went to the hospital where he was after he'd died to pray that he'd be resurrected. It was that sort of situation. And when I spoke to them, I said that I felt one of the main aspects of church is that we teach people, show people how to die well. Now, for people full of faith, that didn't go down well. But for me, it's important because as we've processed people going through suffering and not finding healing, it's how can we find God in this so that you've got his peace and his presence and a sense of his purpose in spite of that. And I'm always reminded of the story of a friend of mine whose wife, she'd had cancer for a long time, lots of prayer for healing, and at times seemed as though there were breakthroughs. But she did die. In the week before she died in hospital, she led 6 people to faith. Now, we wrestle with that, don't we? You know, why couldn't she be healed? And yet this happened. And what I found is that in the life of the church, so much is living in the tension of the mystery and the mess. The tension of the God who lifts us from the miry clay, but walks through the fires and the waters with us. And so, living by faith, to me, is learning to live in the tension. The church, I could tell you good, bad and ugly stories. More time I could tell you a lot more. But the reality is, God loves people, the church is people, and our life, our call, our ministry is to minister something of God to people who might know him or might not know him. Anyway, I hope that gives you something to think about, and get back to me if you want to with any questions, disagreements, thoughts, observations. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.
Who is free indeed? I'm a child of God. Yes, I